I was bullied.
And I was a bully. Bryan's stutter was one of the many things that I bullied him over.
I always believed that I didn't have anyone to talk to or share what I was going through.
It's amazing how a sincere, simple apology can change everything.
Hi, my name is Bryan Schimmel, and I was bullied 4 decades ago. You may be thinking, why does that matter? It matters because whether it was last week, last month, last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 4 decades ago, bullying doesn't stop.
It's everywhere. It's on the sports field.
It's in schools.
It's in the locker room.
It's in social media.
It's in places of worship. I mean, it's literally everywhere.
Yeah.
My name is Fein, and I was a bully. In fact, Bryan's stutter was one of the many things that I bullied him over. I was callous and cruel.
And that is why we are having these dialogues, because this is a subject that is so mercurial that it raises more questions than it does answers. And we believe that it is a subject that people deal with every day in different walks of life. But very few are confronting it head on in the way we are.
I mean, we're not therapists or psychologists. We're a bully and a victim with a lived experience sharing a podcast.
Having a dialogue. That's unusual, if not unique.
Our story, however, is not. In fact, it's as relevant today as it ever was.
So I'll give you a brief summary of how we started out. And I'm going back a long time.
Not that long, but yeah. Okay.
More than half a century. Yeah. I went to King David Primary School, where I was not one of the popular boys, which I know right now is hard to imagine, but I wasn't. Having a speech impediment made me feel different, and not different in a good way. And add to that, I was no sportsman. I did not have a good relationship with a ball. The only time I played soccer was in mandatory PT class, or what you might know as phys ed, mandatory PT class, where I did score 1 goal for the opposing team.
Like Harry Maguire. I mean, today that would enable you to captain Manchester United.
Mm-hmm. But, back then, my gift, if you go and you Google me, you'll find that I am a musician. And my gift was in music. But I wasn't recognized in the same way as somebody who was acing academics or playing first-team rugby. Things are a little different now, and the arts is a lot more recognized. But back then, it put a target on my back. Add to that, I knew at a young age that something else about me was different. And it was really hard being called all kinds of names. Names that, are used, some of them are used even now, like faggot. But back then it was pansy or poof. And so having a speech impediment, not being musical, having a speech impediment, being musical, not being not being a sportsman, being scrawny and thin and weedy and awkward. I was the perfect target for people who bullied, and I didn't have any self-confidence in my physical presence, and I was always afraid of speaking out because I was mocked and I was bullied for having a speech impediment. So that's kind of my background.
Yeah. I mean, I came from a family that was divorced, was a broken home. And so I grew up with parents and step-parents, and it was acrimonious. It was not a happy, friendly divorce. And so there were always dramas, and I didn't have any idea where I fitted in. Like sometimes I was with my dad, and like we had to be a certain way with my dad, and then I was with my mom and her husband, my dad and his wife, and all the different children from all the different marriages. So it was confusing, and I felt like a little yacht in a very, very choppy sea.
At least it was a yacht and not a rowing boat.
Yeah, there's that. Then, coupled with that, I had attractions that I knew at a very young age were not. I didn't even know the language for them. I didn't know the vocabulary. I just knew it was amiss. And I would hear things. I would hear disparaging things, the names that you're talking about. And more than anything, I didn't want them directed at me. I had enough turmoil. The last thing I needed was extra stuff coming my way. And so I started building these walls to protect myself. And because I didn't know better, one of the ways to do that was to deflect any attention from me by bullying someone like you.
Right.
That's where that started.
Now, what we will get to in the course of our podcast is the reasons behind why people bully, and unpack whether those are valid reasons, whether there is a need to be empathetic about context. But at the time of being bullied, I was not aware of anything that had motivated Clinton. All I was experiencing was being victimized and being targeted on a daily basis. I remember you being one of the jocks and egging them on, and that was the lasting memory I had of Clinton. And 37 years later, a mutual school friend of ours brought us back into the same room. It was a moment that I think you felt uncertain about. I was not sure how it might go, but I had gone through life. I had gained a whole lot of confidence. I had found a lot of who I am, and it was like it was more about being curious, because even though you have a gap of that long, your last memory of somebody is how you think you're going to see them again. Yeah. You don't know what the gap in between has done.
I mean, no. Although I had seen your Facebook, because we had become Facebook friends before that.
Which let me just add. Clinton, back in 2009, when Facebook began, it was novel, and there was and it was a means of people who hadn't seen each other for years reconnecting. And in the first months of it, there were pictures and names and reminders of people we were at school with, who that was popping up everywhere, and it was a means of reconnecting with people who we hadn't seen or heard of in years. And I remember how it made me feel when I got friend requests from certain people, because it did trigger emotions for me and some uncomfortable memories. But one of those friend requests was from Clinton, and I did accept his friend request. You know why? Because in the early days of Facebook, that's what you did. You didn't actually care who requested you. You went, yeah.
Look how many friends I've got.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, the interesting thing is that the mutual friend that eventually led us to have the lunch had brought you up before. This was then in 2009, and I had forgotten about school. I didn't think about school much, let alone people from school. But when he brought up your name, I was reminded of how I treated you. And in retrospect, sending the Facebook request, in a way, I kind of thought like it would maybe be an opening to a dialogue. But by not saying anything, by just sending the request and not sending a message, hey, by the way, I know that you're surprised, or whatever it is, I just sent the friend request with no context or no anything. And so it was actually not the bravest attempt at a dialogue.
Right.
But that back then I didn't even like that. It was just.
But you weren't ready to engage in that dialogue, and neither was I.
I mean, I don't. Yeah, I didn't know what I just thought like, fuck, I better apologize.
But it wasn't until 10 years after that, in 2019, that this meeting happened, and it was. I think you always remember the first line that I said to you on meeting. I hadn't seen you in 37 years, and the first thing I said to you was, I remember you from your resting bitch face.
You did. And I was busy thinking, like, well, because Alain, the friend of ours who was there, who precipitated this, hadn't arrived. It was late, of course. And so, like, he wasn't there to soften any blows. It was just you and me. Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, I'd seen from Facebook that you were a different person. And pictures are also like different from seeing someone for real in person. And so then you were like very recognizable to me. And while I was waiting for you and waiting for everyone, I was like, maybe I'm remembering it's like, maybe it wasn't as bad as I'm thinking it was, until you said that. And then I realized, well, yeah, you actually did remember everything, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was worse.
And we sat down, and the way that meeting unfolded was so not what I expected. And it began with Clinton saying to me, it's 37 years too late perhaps, but he said, I want to apologize. That was the first thing that kind of took me completely by surprise, but it was what he said next, what you said next, which was, you said, I'm now paraphrasing, but it was basically what you said. You said, I want to hear from you how I made you feel. And that, you gave me the opportunity to voice what I could not voice back then.
Which, excuse me, was not easy to listen to by any stretch. But I'm interested, like, and we've actually never, we've had this conversation so many times, but did you actually think that I would just sit there and pretend that nothing had ever happened?
I couldn't have known how you were going to react, because I didn't know what had evolved with you. But it was it was a question that invited me to just say whatever I wanted to say. But what was so fascinating for me, excuse
me, sorry.
What was so fascinating for me was that you never actually interrupted me. You never got defensive. You never did, but if, there was none of that. And that, you gave me the opportunity to just express what I felt at the time. And I will never forget how empowering that was for me and how you allowed that to happen. But the very next thing, which was so extraordinary, was once I'd voiced that, you said to me, I have no excuse, but would you mind if I give you context? And I sat and I listened, and it was so enlightening for me, because back then I could never have known what you were going through and what the reasons and the motivations were behind why you were doing that. And what we will get to in the course of our podcast is that I found myself all these years later not only having forgiven Clinton, but I found empathy with you, or for you. And I think it's another subject which we will get to, is the ability for a victim of any kind to find an empathy with the person who's harmed them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the other thing why it resonated with you, and we've discussed this, is that my desire to apologize was genuine. It wasn't one of those conditional apologies where, I was caught out bullying and had a reputation to protect, and so I had to, if I bullied you or if I offended you, I'm sorry. It wasn't that. And I also had to be, because I didn't know how you would take it, how you would receive that apology, I had to be okay with me making a heartfelt apology and you going, fuck you. I'm not interested in your apology. School was like a shitty experience for me because of you. And I had to be okay with that being a potential outcome.
And in the way you raise that, I mean, I think there are a lot of people like that, and we've actually encountered a few since then, who look back and go, we hated school because of bullies and I will still say that I didn't enjoy high school because of what happened. But because of the growth I've been through, I'm able to go, it was fucking hard, it was miserable, I hated it, but I'm not there anymore. And that was my ability to hear you out. Because what would it say about my growth and my letting go of that period if I was going, well, fuck you?
No, absolutely. Even though you would have been entirely justified. And, because we're not saying that now every person who's been a victim must just automatically accept it.
No.
I mean, there's some instances where it's understandable that someone was hurt so much that they literally don't want to accept an apology.
And that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
There's a friend of mine who is a psychologist, and she says, there is no greater suffering than your own. And, we always tend to, whether it's about our social standing, our class standing, whether it's about what we have or what we don't have, there's this compulsion in society to place ourselves in some sort of morbid and twisted comparative scale of my experience is better than your experience and my experience is worse than your experience. Right? You can only compare your own experience to your own life experience. So what we are trying to do in doing this is to just inspire people of what the possibilities are.
Well, speaking of, I mean, the outcome of that lunch, we left that lunch. It was cathartic for both of us. Yeah. And, it was by no means an easy, light lunch. Left feeling a lot lighter, but the lunch itself and hearing things from your perspective and having to confront what I did and who I was difficult. And without going into the whole long story afterwards, I just remember I texted you after the lunch. And I said, I just feel that this was such an amazing lunch. We creative people, we should do something with it. Yeah. And your response was absolutely.
And then COVID happened. Right. COVID happened and we lost touch. And it was early in 2022 that I heard from Clinton, and he said that he was busy writing, a memoir of sorts, and that he was talking about our story, and he was writing about it, and he wanted to know. He wanted me to read it. He didn't want to, as you said sometimes, you didn't want to read trigger me. Correct. But you wanted to know if I wanted to read it, and you were asking if I minded if you used my name.
And put it on Facebook for my friends to read. Right. And potentially yours.
Right. And I said, can I read it? And it was hard to read because I was suddenly reading it in print from your perspective. But what was there was so reflective of what we had unpacked and at our lunch. And I said to him, don't change a word, and post it. And from his post, there was interest that came, And the long and short of it is we ended up saying we have a story that is so unique from a point of view of we're not just, this is not just a victim testimonial. We feel an imperative to tell a story from both sides. And we said, yes, both of us are creative people. Let us work at creating some kind of keynote and some kind of talk.
And by this time, and we were like just in the very, very like nascent stages of it. And we got a call from King David, which was the scene of the crime.
Which was the scene of the crime, and the principal of King David said, would you like to
do whatever
it is and debut?
Because we weren't even sure what it
was.
Exactly what it was.
And we did it in May of 22 at our old school.
First for the parents.
Yep. And then the whole school.
Yeah.
Not knowing how it would be received and all of that. And long story short, we've done it now in the last 2 years. We've done it over 60 times to schools and to corporates. Yeah. And that in itself should tell you guys how important not just our story is, but how we tell it, how we approach it. And we have some controversial views on how we deal with it, which we will unpack in our podcast. And probably the main reason why we are doing this is because at the end of each keynote, we have a Q&A, and it's the Q&A that we really have learnt what people's experiences are. And what always comes up is you started a conversation, how do you keep the conversation going? Yeah. And this is how we are going to keep the conversation going. And we're also asking all of you and saying, this is an engagement, it is a discussion. So
we want to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your experiences of being bullied, or having been somebody who has bullied, or a bystander, or an enabler. So this podcast is about discussion, and we look forward to unpacking all these topics with you.
So until next time, this has been amazing, and looking really forward to it. This is great.
Absolutely.